welcome to the video over the digestive system. So as you can see from this diagram right here, the main function of the digestive system is taking nutrients to the rest of the body. They go into the cardiovascular system and then from there to the tissue cells. You can see oxygen and carbon dioxide are taken care of by the respiratory system, and waste go out through the urinary system, which we'll talk about next. If we look at the entire digestive tract, it starts at the mouth, travels through the esophagus, stomach, intestines, and ends at the anus. And if we look at it close up, we can see that it is a muscular tube, lots of muscles in it, and it's lined by a mucous epithelium. Surrounding it, you have what's called the mesentery. The mesentery is going to hold things in place. It also contains blood vessels and lymphatic vessels and nerves. If we look closer at the inner lining, this is called the mucosa. It's a mucous membrane, so it will have mucus glands. Here's some mucus glands that helps to lubricate the digestive tract, and it's also for protection. It often contains villi like you see here, and that increases the surface area for absorption. And here's another look at the villi. The submucosa, you'll see right in this area here. The submucosa, it's connective tissue. It has blood and lymphatic vessels and some glands that are going to be secreting digestive enzymes. Then we can see here the muscular layers, the muscularis externa. There's two layers, and here's what it looks like under the microscope. There's a circular layer and a longitudinal layer. It's two layers of smooth muscle, and that helps move food along the digestive tract. And then the serosa is the outer layer. It's a layer of visceral peritoneum. It surrounds the intestines and kind of protects it. So now we need to talk about smooth muscle, because the digestive system uses smooth muscle. It regulates the movement of materials along the digestive tract. You don't have to think about swallowing your food. Once you swallow it, you just forget about it, and it moves through the digestive tract because that smooth muscle is involuntary. So here's a relaxed smooth muscle, and when they contract, they almost like twirl up like a corkscrew. And since they're arranged in circular layers around the digestive tract, that causes the whole digestive tract to constrict. There are a couple of different types in multi-unit smooth muscle. The muscle cells are innervated in motor units similar to skeletal muscle, so this is like what we would see in the eye. In visceral smooth muscle, like we see in the digestive tract, an entire sheet of smooth muscle contracts together. So the neurotransmitters released here, and they have what are called pace setter cells, similar to the pacemaker cells in the heart. And these muscle cells, these smooth muscle cells, are connected by gap junctions, so the action potential is going to spread throughout them, and the whole sheet is going to contract at the same time. The myofilaments in smooth muscle are not arranged into sarcomeres, so the muscles can contract even when they're stretched. So remember, with smooth muscle, with skeletal muscle, we had this diagram where they contract, they generate the most force where there's maximum overlap of actin and myosin. Smooth muscle doesn't have sarcomeres, and that allows it to stretch, like your stomach is going to stretch when it fills up with food, and the smooth muscle can still contract. This video is going to show an animation of peristalsis, of how the smooth muscle moves things through our intestinal tract, and that process is called peristalsis. So there you can see the large intestine, how it contracts, and that contraction kind of moves along the intestine, and that is going to push food along, and now you can see some of the food moving through there. That's how the food moves through our digestive tract. So that process is called peristalsis. It's a coordinated contraction of the smooth muscle layers that moves food along the digestive tract. So you can see the circular muscle will contract behind it, and the longitudinal muscles contract ahead of it, and as different parts of the circular muscle layer contract, that pushes this food through the digestive tract. Another thing the smooth muscles do is called segmentation. This helps to mix the food within the digestive tract. So again, as different layers of the different sections of the circular muscle layer contract, it mixes up the food. The activity of the digestive tract is controlled by a couple things. Again, it's nice that we don't have to think about it. First, there are some local factors, changes in pH. So when we eat some food, that's generally going to change the pH in there. Another big one is stretch. So if we eat food, it's going to stretch, and when it stretches, it knows it needs to become activated. Also, specific chemicals or nutrients such as glucose, they can activate the digestive tract. There are also some neurons. There's what we call short reflexes, which are triggered by stretch receptors and chemoreceptors. And then there are long reflexes, which control the large-scale peristaltic waves. So that's controlling the waves that move things, for example, through the small intestine or large intestine. There are also hormones that control the digestive system. There are 18 hormones produced by the digestive tract, and we'll talk about the important ones later on. The entire digestive tract, if you were to stretch it out, it's about 33 feet long. And we're going to look at the general functions. So the first one is ingestion. This is just bringing food into your mouth. And then we have mechanical processing. This is breaking down food into smaller pieces. This happens mainly in the mouth with our teeth, or we do that even with a knife and fork if we're polite. That also happens some in our stomach and a little bit in intestines. Then we have digestion, or sometimes it's called chemical digestion. This is the chemical and enzymatic breakdown of food into molecules that can be absorbed. So when you eat a piece of pizza, it's in pieces that are too small to get into our blood. So the mechanical processing is going to break it down into smaller pieces, but it still can't get into our blood. The digestion is going to break it down into simple molecules that are small enough to be absorbed into our blood and that our body can use. Then the next function is secretion. Acids, enzymes, and buffers are secreted into the digestive tract, and these are going to do the digestion. Another major function is absorption. Organic molecules, water, vitamins, and electrolytes are absorbed into the blood. And then finally, compaction and elimination. So things that we can't digest or waste that we want to get rid of, they're compacted and eliminated. So now we're going to look at the parts of the digestive tract. So first we have the oral cavity. This has the tongue, the teeth, and the salivary glands. This is where ingestion happens. Mechanical processing starts here, and chemical digestion starts here as well. There are some enzymes in the saliva that start to break down your food. Most notably salivary amylase, which will break down starches. And the teeth are mainly responsible for the mechanical digestion. Different teeth have different shapes. The teeth in front are for tearing or grinding or cutting. The ones in the back are flatter. They are more for grinding. And so that's teeth. And one more time, teeth. Alright, next we're going to talk about the pharynx and the esophagus. They're going to help with swallowing. So the pharynx is in this region, and then here's the esophagus, and their main job is swallowing. If you look at them, they're made up of a stratified squamous epithelium, so they're pretty tough. Because that food coming down might have sharp edges or something. You don't want to break through this. As I was saying, the main job of the pharynx and esophagus is to help with swallowing. So here you can see a snake swallowing a kangaroo. And I'm sorry if you can't unsee these images, but it's pretty amazing how they swallow. We don't swallow in the same way as a snake, because basically their whole body can act as their stomach. So he did swallow that whole kangaroo. I'm not sure what happened to the snake after that. There are 3 phases of swallowing. The first phase is called the buccal phase. This is where the tongue pushes the bolus back to the oropharynx. The soft palate and the uvula are going to rise up to seal off the nasopharynx. Then we have the pharyngeal phase, where the epiglottis folds down to seal off the glottis down here so the food doesn't go into our trachea. And the bolus is moved down into the esophagus. And then finally the esophageal phase. Peristalsis pushes the food down into the stomach. So that is swallowing. Most of the digestive organs are found within the abdominal cavity, right in here. And this shows again, they're in the abdominal cavity, and this figure shows the peritoneum. We have a parietal peritoneum surrounding the outside of the abdominal cavity, and then a visceral peritoneum which surrounds each organ, and that keeps each organ in place, and it also allows for the different sections to expand. So when you first eat, first your stomach is going to expand, and then next food is going to go into your small intestine here. So different segments of the small intestine are going to expand as food moves through them. And then finally food will move through this is the large intestine here, that will expand as food moves through it. So let's look next at the stomach. The stomach is a muscular, expandable organ with 3 muscle layers. And here's a real stomach. And here this shows the 3 muscle layers. So most of the intestinal tract has just 2 muscle layers. The stomach has an extra one to help with mechanical processing. And some digestion, chemical digestion happens there as well. If we look at this is going to show us the mechanical processing that goes on in the stomach. So this whole thing is the stomach, and we see it moves and it pushes through. This would be the small intestine right here. As the stomach moves, it actually pushes food into the small intestine. And as different parts of the stomach contract, that mixes up the food and helps to break it down into smaller pieces. Now, if we look at the lining of the stomach, it has what are called gastric glands. The lining of the stomach has gastric glands, these are going to secrete acids, enzymes, and hormones. And if we look closer, here's a close-up on one of these gastric glands. The G cells, or they're also known as enteroendocrine cells, they're going to secrete hormones. The chief cells down here are going to secrete pepsinogen. This is going to be converted into pepsin, which breaks down proteins in the stomach. And then we have the parietal cells. Parietal cells secrete what's called intrinsic factor that helps us to absorb vitamin B12, which is necessary for blood clotting, among other things. The parietal cells also secrete hydrochloric acid. And they don't actually secrete hydrochloric acid because that would cause the cells to break down themselves, because that's a very strong acid. What they do is they secrete hydrogen ions and chloride ions, and then inside the stomach those come together to form the hydrochloric acid. So the carbonic acid inside these parietal cells, carbonic acid is dissociated into hydrogen ions and bicarbonate. The bicarbonate is transported out into the interstitial fluid and eventually to the blood. The hydrogen ions are secreted into the stomach, and chloride ions diffuse through these cells, and then inside the stomach they'll form hydrochloric acid, and this keeps the cells from digesting themselves. And these cells are lined with a thick mucus to protect them once the hydrochloric acid is in the stomach. Next, we're going to talk about the small intestine. Small intestine is specialized for absorption, and it has if we look at it, there are these folds called the plicae circularis. They increase the surface area, and then these villi also increase the surface area. And if you looked even closer, you would see microvilli on them. All these increase the surface area to about 2,200 square feet, and all that is contained in your abdominal cavity in a relatively small space. So in the small intestine we have some mechanical processing, lots of digestion and absorption. And if we look inside these villi, we'll see blood vessels, arteries, and veins, so some nutrients are absorbed directly into them. And these green things are called lacteals. The lacteals are for absorbing lipids. Lipids are, they won't dissolve in the blood so easily, so they actually go into these lacteals, which are part of the lymphatic system, and they will bring it back to the blood. So here again is the plicae circularis and the villi increasing the surface area, and we can see the blood vessels in the lacteals for absorbing nutrients. And in this figure you can see, they call it the brush border. Those are microvilli, which increase the surface area even more. Okay, there are three regions of the small intestine: the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum, and they look different. In the duodenum you have lots of these glands, so in here you're secreting lots of enzymes and also buffers. The stomach has a very low pH, a pH of about 2, and so food coming from the stomach is going to have a very low pH. So in the duodenum, that's directly after the stomach, you're releasing not only enzymes but buffers to raise the pH so it doesn't break down your small intestine. And then in the jejunum, you'll have lots of these plicae circularis. Most absorption happens in the jejunum, and then absorption is finished in the ileum, and in the ileum you'll see more of these lymph follicles taking care of any foreign things. That's the malt. And here's an actual picture of the duodenum. You can see how many of the plicae circularis there are, not that many, compared to the jejunum, where there's plicae circularis everywhere because it's primarily specialized for absorption. And then in the ileum, you can see there's not as many again. And you can see more of these lymph nodules. Alright, there are 5 major hormones that we're going to talk about. The first is gastrin. Gastrin is secreted by G cells in the stomach and in the duodenum, and it's released when food enters the stomach or due to vagus nerve stimulation. This increases the stomach motility or the movement. It also stimulates production of gastric acids and enzymes, which we call gastric juice. So this hormone is getting the stomach ready to digest things. We also have secretin. This is released when chyme enters the duodenum, the first part of the small intestine. This increases secretion of bile from the liver and buffers from the pancreas. It also reduces gastric motility. So when food enters the intestines, we release secretin, which gets the intestines ready to go, and it also tells the stomach to slow down. Then we have gastric inhibitory peptide. This is secreted when fats and carbohydrates enter the duodenum. Just like it says, it inhibits the gastric activities, tells the stomach to slow down. It also causes insulin release. It stimulates the duodenal glands to release their enzymes. Also causes lipid synthesis in adipose tissue and glucose use by skeletal muscles. So again, when fats and carbohydrates, especially glucose, enter the duodenum, you're going to release the gastric inhibitory peptide, and it's going to cause your body to use those fats and glucose. Next we have cholecystokinin, or CCK for short. This is secreted when chyme arrives in the duodenum. It increases the secretion and the release of pancreatic enzymes and inhibits gastric activity. It also reduces hunger. So this gets the small intestines ready to do their job, and we think it helps with hunger. And then you also should know vasoactive intestinal peptide, or VIP. This stimulates secretion in the intestinal glands. It also dilates capillaries around there so they can get ready to absorb food, and this is going to inhibit acid production in the stomach. So it's going to tell the stomach to slow down. So this is showing how all those work. So gastrin is going to increase activity in the stomach. GIP is going to inhibit gastrin. And we can see GIP, secretin, and CCK, and VIP, all these things are getting the small intestine ready to do its job of absorbing food. Alright, there are 3 phases of gastric secretion, so stomach secretion. The first is the cephalic phase. This happens when you see, smell, taste, or even think about food. So this produces the gastric juice, which is the acids, the enzymes, and the mucus. It prepares the stomach to receive food. Also can stimulate the salivary glands in your mouth. Next we have the gastric phase. This is initiated by stretch of the stomach or an increase in the pH of the stomach, and also the presence of undigested materials. So this causes even more gastric juice to be produced. It causes the muscularis externa, the muscles, to contract to mix the food. So when the stomach fills up, that's when this phase starts, and it releases even more acids and enzymes and causes the stomach to contract to mix the food. And then finally we have the intestinal phase, or sometimes it's called the enterogastric reflex, when chyme, which is just undigested food, well, partially digested food, when that enters the duodenum, that inhibits gastric juice production and muscle contraction in the stomach. And the pyloric sphincter, which is right in here, causes that to contract to control the rate of food entering the duodenum. So once food is in the intestines, it tells the stomach to slow down. It says, stop, don't give me any more food. And then once Once this food has been processed and moved through the small intestine, then the stomach can release more food. When the stomach is stretched, there are two reflexes that are activated. First is the gastroenteric reflex. The gastroenteric reflex stimulates motility and secretion of the small intestine, so that's getting the small intestine ready to get food. And then you have the gastroileal reflex. This opens the ileocecal valve, which is down here in between the small and large intestines. That allows materials to enter the large intestine. This is the large intestine. Its job is to store and concentrate fecal material, so hopefully all the nutrients are absorbed in the small intestine, and what we have left is things that we can't digest, such as some plant matter or waste that we want to get rid of. Really, the only absorption that happens here is absorption of water. Some bacteria, most bacteria die when they get into the stomach, but some survive and enter the cecum, which is this area down here. These bacteria, they ferment indigestible carbohydrates, so some things like plant starches our bodies can't digest, but these bacteria can. And as a byproduct of that, they release irritating acids and gases, and that is what makes you fart. So next time someone gets mad at you for farting, say it's not my fault, it's the bacteria that live in my large intestine. But also these bacteria, they make some of the B vitamins and vitamin K. And so water and some vitamins are absorbed in the large intestine. This shows about 1 liter of water a day is absorbed through the small intestine. So then this is the end of the line here. And there are two sphincters here. You have an internal anal sphincter and an external anal sphincter. The internal one is smooth muscle, and it's involuntary, so you can't control that on your own. The external one is skeletal muscle, and it is voluntary. And it is a wonderful day when your children learn to control their external anal sphincter. So this figure shows us the defecation reflex. So basically what happens is as food gets into here, it distends or stretches the rectum. There are many stretch receptors. They're going to activate motor neurons, and this causes peristalsis all throughout the large intestine, so that's going to push more stuff into here. And it also will relax the internal anal sphincter. And then once we get to a convenient place, we relax our external anal sphincter and defecation occurs. Now we're going to look at some of the accessory organs of digestion. These here are salivary glands. There's actually 5 salivary glands, because these are on each side and these are on each side. They lubricate and moisten the mouth, and they start the digestion of carbohydrates. The saliva is 99% water. It does contain amylase, which is going to break down the carbohydrates. It contains lysozyme, which is an antibacterial protein and antibodies. The liver. This is where here's the liver. Here's a cross section through the liver, so you can see it's one of your larger organs. It has over 200 known functions. We're just going to talk about a few, just the ones that are involved in digestion. So, first, the synthesis and secretion of bile. Bile is important for the breakdown of lipids. Also, storage of glycogen and lipid reserves. It also helps to maintain normal concentrations of glucose, amino acids, and fatty acids in the blood. The liver can synthesize and interconvert nutrient types. So, for example, if we're not eating any proteins, the liver cells can take carbohydrates and convert them into proteins for us. The liver cells, they're called hepatocytes, and they're arranged into these lobules like this. And blood enters from two sources, from the hepatic portal vein, which is bringing nutrients from the intestines, and then also the hepatic artery, which is bringing oxygen. And as the blood moves through these hepatocytes, they can absorb or secrete nutrients to keep the levels normal. So here's a close-up on that. You can see blood flows very closely along these hepatocytes so they can monitor the nutrient levels. Also, we see these little pink cells called Kupffer cells. These are macrophages that will clean the blood. Also, we know the liver is involved in detoxifying certain things, especially alcohol. And another job of these hepatocytes is to produce bile, and these green ducts here carry the bile. So as the blood moves through here, it gets cleaned and the nutrient levels regulated, and then it goes into the central vein, and that's going to form the hepatic vein, which then goes back to the inferior vena cava. And then this green thing is a bile duct, so the liver produces bile. That bile can be stored in the gallbladder. The gallbladder stores and concentrates bile. The hormone CCK, so cholecystokinin, will cause the gallbladder to contract and secrete that bile into the duodenum, where it's needed to help break down lipids or fats. And here's a close-up on where that empties into the small intestine right here. It joins with the pancreatic duct. Okay, the pancreas is another digestive organ. We also talked about it with the endocrine system, but it also has a digestive function. It produces enzymes that will digest all nutrient types. So some of those are pancreatic alpha amylase, which is for digesting carbohydrates and starch. Pancreatic lipase, which is for breaking down lipids. Nucleases break down DNA and RNA. And then there are several proteolytic enzymes such as trypsin, chymotrypsin, carboxypeptidase, and elastase. These break down proteins. Then last, we're going to talk about some digestive disorders. This is periodontal disease. It's a bacterial infection that will break down the gums and lead to tooth decay. This is someone with mumps. Mumps can infect your salivary glands and make them not work right. Esophagitis is inflammation of the esophagus, and one of the main symptoms of that is heartburn. Hepatitis is an inflammation of the liver. This can be caused by alcohol, other drugs, or a virus. Cirrhosis is when damaged liver cells are replaced by fibrous scar tissue, and that's what you can see in this figure. This doesn't look healthy. If the bile becomes too concentrated, bile in the gallbladder, we can form gallstones, and then they can block the cystic or the hepatic bile duct, and that can be very, very painful. Gastritis is an inflammation of the stomach, and ulcers occur when acids leak through the lining of the stomach. Most of these are caused by bacteria. Pancreatitis is inflammation of the pancreas. Enteritis is inflammation of the intestine. and this usually causes diarrhea, and this little organism Giardia is a common cause from unclean drinking water. And then colitis is an inflammation of the colon. This often will cause diarrhea or constipation.